So, Kelly, thinking way back to the 1990s, 700 years ago, how did you borrow games back then?
So I moral fiber was stronger at that period of time. And not that hypothetically I'm more open to securing free free market ROMs in the today, but back in the day, it just I was the fear of the FBI crashing through my door to get things. Very, very little experience with piracy at all. So what about you?
A little more, a friend of mine was
Oh yeah.
a friend was heavily involved in the video game piracy game. So, kid that
Was
I
he the
knew,
brother of your girlfriend that lived out of state? This friend?
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Gotcha. Gotcha.
So, a kid that I knew when I was in grade school, we were all into video games, of course. And not only did he have every console, whatever the newest console was, he had it. He also was really into PC gaming. So he had, compared to most of us, didn't have PCs. Even when I got my gateway loaded up with Windows 3.1 or whatever it was back at that time, that was better than most of my friends had. But he had like a very, compared to all of us, very sophisticated computer system and could play games of a much higher caliber than we could at a far better frame rate than any of us could. So if we wanted to try something out, we would always go to his house first because he'd be able to play it. I cannot remember exactly what his dad did, but it was something tech related. And that's how they were able to get their hands on a lot of stuff. But being as into video games as the whole family was, they were also the only people I knew who were getting import games at the time. So we would go over and sometimes they would have a Japanese version of a game or a game that hadn't been released in the US yet. And then one time I went over and they had these weird boxes on all of their consoles that sat on top of the console and you put the cartridge in it and it put the games onto floppy disks, like the little the little floppy disk you would put on, say, your shareware Doom to put it onto your PC. And I was absolutely fascinated with this. And it wasn't for a while. I never knew anyone else who had these. It wasn't for a while later that I actually saw some ads for them in game magazines, and it was like from like sketchy looking stores that specialized in like import games and things like that. But essentially what it would do is way before the emulators we would have now is they would dump the ROM from the cartridge onto a floppy disk. And then you could play the games in these floppy disk drives and of course trade games with people and things like that. So not only could he just, rent a game, dump the ROM and then have the game, but because his dad was really into gaming and knew a lot of people, they were trading games with other people. So he would get a stack of floppy disks of brand new games and things like that we would get to play. So it was really cool, but it was something that the concept of emulation wasn't something I was in any way familiar with, let alone this sort of pre emulation that we were seeing. That sounds dirty, pre emulation. Let alone this pre-emulation that was happening when we were playing. So when I came across this video that I sent to you that I'm sure we can link to somewhere, when I came across this video, it immediately all came kind of flooding back to me because I'd kind of forgotten about this for a while because again, I had never seen it outside of this one friend's house and a couple of sketchy ads a couple of years later.
Yeah, so do you remember the brand? Which one was it? Was it the Pro Fighter X Turbo?
I believe that it was for the Super Nintendo, but they also had versions of it for Genesis and Nintendo as well. And I believe those were different brands.
Yeah, and they've carried on because, hypothetically, if you were to find some ROMs available today on some locations, a lot of times you'll see file extensions like .sw uh, C, and it'll be for like Super Nintendo stuff, or SWC for like Super Wild Card. So that was the extension for Super Wild Card, and hypothetically, if I had a directory full of Super Nintendo ones, and hypothetically I looked at them just before the show, a lot of SWCs would have been there, hypothetically. But yeah, it is super interesting, and the concept, the out, I guess, for the manufacturers. Although, I mean, so these all came from China. That's where the systems came from. Now they've kind of really started to just back off entirely and just say, "Hey, here you go, give me $100 and I'll give you a massive ROM dump," and they just move on. But at least here they were give the illusion of legitimacy by saying, "Well, if you need to back up your game, really important, you back up that cartridge that is fairly unlikely, not as much as risk as a floppy disk to fail." Um, but just so happens that that backup that you've made to protect the asset that you've bought can be handed to somebody else and do some things. Although Nintendo, being Nintendo and pretty good about protecting their proprietary rights, would do a few things to when the game would kick up. If it'd say, now wait a second, there's no helper chip present that should be present for there, or wait a second, you have more available writable RAM than you should, then it would shut you down. So like the Donkey Country series, all were pretty adept at least scanning the environment and saying, wait a second, I think I'm not just a cartridge here.
Yeah, and this was I don't know if they ran into issues with that. I'm sure they probably found a way around it, but I don't know if they had ran into issues with that because this is even predating that. I remember, playing floppy disks as backup copies of games that they owned of, the original Street Fighter 2 for Super Nintendo and Final Fight, and like not quite launch titles, but directly after. So this is predating that by a few years.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to hear from any of our viewers if they were hypothetically securing ROMs in some ways. What would be the fiction article you would write to describe what you did, which you'd like
Right.
to read for entertainment purposes. Ban piracy fiction. So would I'd love to hear some fiction from our listeners.
And it is funny because I had kind of forgotten about this. And I remember, we've been talking a lot about Nintendo 64 and things like that, and the measures that they took to try to combat piracy on there. But there was piracy going back to earlier cartridge systems. And I had completely forgotten that I had allegedly seen this firsthand happen.
Yeah, statute of limitations is passed probably for your case. Well,
I was only a witness and I didn't understand what I was seeing.
that's right. Seems fair. It we'll cut your fine down by half. That's what we do
They were
these days.
just backing up copies of games, which you're allowed to do.
That's right. Then got confused, gave somebody my backup copy. They just needed a floppy disk. Then they accidentally put it in theirs. And what do you know? These things happen.
To Kelly's point, though, I don't have any floppy disks still of anything that's working, but I played a 40-year-old game cartridge the other day.
Yeah, I've got, I would say 800 3.5 inch floppies around, but there are Amiga in trace because the awesome thing in Amiga's software, they did a lot for copyright protection as well. Some pretty clever ways to kind of do that. But what was nice with the Amiga was the burgeoning freeware and shareware community. So there was number of magazines that would come out with a 3.5 inch floppy disk included. With the magazine, you get demos of various games and different things, and then there'd be these user groups. So I'm from Illinois, and there was the group called KUKUG, which was Champaign Urbana Amiga users group of some sort. So how those letters all work to be KUKUG, I can't tell you, but they were called KUKUG. And they would monthly put out a new disc of just here's a utility that somebody wrote, or here's a demo of a game, or here's a freeware game. And so there was just a huge amount of software you can get to play with. Some of it wasn't great. Some of it was pretty cool. So that was that was my major influx of new interesting things, was the Amiga user group stuff.
Yeah, I had a similar. I There was a magazine that I had subscribed to. It was a PC magazine. um, when I was a kid, I subscribed to magazines, which in hindsight seems weird. Not just that that was a thing you could do back in the day, because kids today would never understand that. But I was a kid subscribing to. So I guess they didn't care back then. Like if you sent your $20 or whatever it was, you were a subscriber. So I subscribed to a couple of video game magazines. One was a PC magazine, and I wasn't as heavy into the PC gaming. I was definitely more a console guy. But that PC magazine came with a 3.5 inch floppy disk every month that would have like all the new shareware stuff and everything on there. So I didn't get Doom that way. I'd actually buy a disc of that. But a lot of games I got the initial shareware of that way. And if my friend happened to be over and bring some floppy disks with him that he copied onto my DOS, these things happened.
Yep. People slip.
Yeah,
Discs
I
fly
was
into
I was
drive.
basically a victim.
That's right. It yep, that's the way it all kind of works out. So yeah, if only there was a different distribution mechanism today to connect people with new and interesting software. Because that magazine's floppy disk model was solid.
Yeah,
That was good. Too bad there's no way today. But
we should go back. You and I should start a newsletter, like a physical newsletter that we send out to people.
yeah, yep, and that's where we'll announce when the Bog Boy is ready to be released. So we'll double down on the retro with that. Excellent. Um, any other hypotheticals you want to share for this week?
No, I not hypothetically want people to like and subscribe, obviously, and leave a comment. Let us know, would you subscribe to our physical newsletter?
Yeah, definitely. And while you're there, after you've subscribed and hit that bell for notifications, be sure to check out Hard No, the world's shortest podcast, available on a playlist for the low price of free.
Bog Panda.